This video is going to tell you all you need to know about Bellwright, a medieval survival game made by Donkey Cruise that is supposed to launch into early access pretty soon. So let's go through the game. Now, quick disclaimer, I am basing this video on the recent playtest that I participated in, which means that my experience playing this game is going to be different than your experience playing this game. The devs have said that they will try to work in the feedback that they got from this playtest into the game before early access launches. So again, your experience playing this game will be different as changes will have been made to the game in the time in between. Now to answer the first and most important question, what is Bellwright? Well, to put it simple, Bellwright is a mix between Medieval Dynasty and Mount and Blade. You have the village building and management aspects of Medieval Dynasty, while also having the kingdom/nation making aspects of Mount and Blade. You're pretty much thrown into a medieval world and have to collect and harvest resources, do quests for local villagers, build up your own village, and then slowly expand that into its own nation by liberating other already existing villages. Also, Bellwright is a single player game, though you do have co-op. Now, you're not just dropped into this world, because there is a story to Bellwright. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, skip ahead. There's probably going to be a timestamp somewhere, but let's discuss the story of Bellwright. Now, I haven't delved too far into the story of Bellwright. I didn't have enough time for it during this playtest, but I do know the starting point of the story of Bellwright. The starting point of the story of Bellwright is that you went into the forest as a kid, where the royal family was also hunting at the time. You saw the royal heir, aka the prince and the princess, playing in the forest until the prince gets shot by an arrow. The princess sees you, blames you for her brother's murder, the king sends out a warrant for your execution, and your father has you smuggled out of the country. Then years later, you return to the kingdom after the man who smuggled you out of it is assassinated, and you find a strange sigil with him, and you return to the kingdom looking for answers. By the time of your return, the sister or the princess that I mentioned has become a, by the game's description, evil queen with tyranny and such. So you're looking for answers in a land that is clearly struggling. Then let's talk about character creation, because it's going to be the first thing that you'll do when you start the game. Now, when it comes to character creation, it's not really detailed. You basically pick a face from a catalog of faces, then pick a hairstyle, potentially a hair color, and then you set off on your adventure. So the game doesn't give you like sliders to really detail, tweak your character, which it doesn't really need in my opinion. Although at the time of the playtest, character creation was very limited, with only 3 hairstyles I think per gender. You could only have brown hair, and when it came to the catalog of faces, only a quarter of those were for like female characters, so it was heavily skewed towards male characters. Now, I do think that character creation is probably going to get expanded upon early access, not so much in like, oh, they are going to add sliders so that you can really tweak the face of your character, but more that like the amount of options in the catalogs of like hair color, and faces are going to be expanded, because I don't think that everybody wants to have a brown-haired character. After character creation, you see the prologue or the story that I mentioned beforehand, unless you skipped because you didn't want spoilers, play out through cinematic slides, and then you get dropped into the world of Bellwright. So now let's talk about the world of Bellwright. Trying to avoid story spoilers here, but you basically need to earn the trust of the local villagers who don't trust you at the start of the game. The way that you earn their trust is by building up your own village and then doing quests for the local villagers in the meantime as well. And then slowly, I assume this progresses into building your own little nation by liberating these villagers. Now, beyond that, the world of Bellwright is a pretty standard cookie-cutter kind of medieval survival world, both graphically and setup-wise. You'll have your little villages and forests dotted around. You will face enemies in the form of wild animals and bandits, which I assume become more dangerous as you progress through the game. And then the world of Bellwright, size-wise, is actually pretty large in the time that I've played, which is around 5 hours. I haven't even explored what it feels like 1/10 of it, so it is a pretty large world, but it's pretty standard. I don't really have much to say about the world in terms of critique beyond one point, which is the NPCs, which in a single player game, the NPCs carry a little bit more weight, and in Bellwright, the NPCs aren't memorable, and if they are memorable, I would say they are memorable for the wrong reasons. Because if you take a look at their dialogue, the sentences don't really flow well, there's seemingly words missing, and the way that the dialogue is written makes it really awkward and weird to read. And then there's the minor point of where there are voiceovers. The voiceovers are really dry and monotone, but that's a really small point, but I just had to mention it. But that's about the world of Bellwright. Now let's discuss how you are going to survive in Bellwright. The survival mechanics of Bellwright are pretty easy, at least to me they were, because there's no drinking, so you will not die of dehydration, and food is only really there for stamina, so you are not going to starve without it. Now, when it comes to getting injured and health regen, the main way is to basically just go to sleep. There might be health items in the game, I haven't found them yet, but the main way the game tells you to regen your health is to just go to sleep. Now, when it comes to harvesting resources, it's pretty standard. You get your logs from large trees. Anything smaller will just give you general wood. You can collect herbs, you can hunt animals, you can mine stone and other materials. Like, harvesting resources is pretty standard. I did have to change the keybind to it because on standard, the keybind for harvesting resources is the same as when you attack. So I would be trying to collect a herb and I would just start slashing the ground with my axe. So I had to change that keybind, but that's again a very minor thing. Now, speaking of slashing things, there's no crime system. I've tried, because of course I, for the sake of this video, wanted to see all avenues of the game. So I went into the first village that I saw and tried stealing stuff. I couldn't. I went up to like a table, because in Medieval Dynasty, because that's probably the game that this game or that Bellwright is going to be most compared to, you can just rob a village blind. You can't in Bellwright because everything is pretty much nailed to the ground. Well, you physically just can't pick things up. However, what you can do when it comes to crime is murder everything in sight. I tried. The village will of course hate you, but you can just go on a murder spree. If you survive the guards, that is. Since I've started talking about going on a murder spree, it only feels natural to then discuss the combat in Bellwright. Now, combat in Bellwright I think is the biggest weakness of the game. Because have you ever tried fighting someone while encased in jello? Because that's what it feels like to fight someone in Bellwright. The combat pace is weirdly slow, it feels really sluggish and floaty. Hits that should connect don't, and vice versa. And when it comes to enemy AI, you really in combat don't really have to think much, because the enemies will just come at you in a straight line. So in the end, you just end up just hacking away at somebody and not really strategizing, which especially I can see in late games when you have like the really big battles can feel really lackluster when you know the enemy is just going to come at you in a straight line. And that's combined with the slow combat pace and just the overall sluggish pace of combat just makes combat feel really boring to me. Now, there is a fun side to combat, or at least a side bit of combat, which is the potential for raids. The raids are a fun mechanic to add consequences to your actions in game, because if you just start mercilessly slaughtering every bandit that you can find, you will inevitably see a raid percentage meter, which from what I gathered is like the chance that a raid is going to happen in the next few days. So if that's like 100, it's I think guaranteed that a raid is going to happen. And if a raid is going to happen, you are notified of it so you can prepare. But a raid is pretty much enemies will spawn near your village and will start to attack your village. Now, if you lose the raid, they will steal some of your stuff and damage your buildings. If you win, of course, the raid percentage meter goes down again and you're basically free to go. And I learned this very early on because I thought, oh yeah, the bandits are going to be a very easy source of resources. So I started slaughtering them. And then I got raided with only a starter village and one other villager to defend. So I got butchered. Half of my stuff got stolen and the shack that I lived in got damaged. So I had to repair stuff and the villager was out for like a day. So yeah, fun. As my village is burning and my stuff is getting looted, let's talk about village building and management. So starting off with village building, this is surprisingly fast in Bellwright. Like if you know what you're doing and you have what you need, then you get a village started really fast. And the game really wants you to get into building your village really fast, because the first quest already makes you build a shack. And then the second quest already gives you the potential to recruit a villager. As for the actual village building in Bellwright, it's pretty straightforward. You have a build menu from which you can pick whatever building you need. This build menu is dependent on how much you've researched, because you will need to research like production buildings and such. But you pick from this build menu what you need, you plop it down, and you can rotate it and everything. So if you spend a bit of time on it, you can probably make very pretty villages. But after you plop it down, there will be a stockpile next to the building or the blueprints that you just plop down, which you can place the materials on. You can also have a camp chest in your village from which villagers can like pick up the materials and then plop it down on the construction site. And yes, your villagers will be able to build the buildings for you if there's enough materials available to them. Only the materials in the camp chest or whatever communal chest you have will be available to your villagers. But you can also, of course, as you're starting out, build those buildings yourself. And it's a bit about you place down the materials in the stockpile, or I think you can also do this directly from your inventory, but you basically walk around the construction site and there will be like circles where you need to place what material. So it's not as in like Medieval Dynasty where you just hold the materials and you face the wall and just start hammering it. You will actually need to move around, and like materials need to be in like specific locations. Although you don't need to be just like very precise sometimes. But yeah, villagers can build the buildings. As for the village management side of Bellwright, it's pretty simple and straightforward. If you have a production building and it has availability, aka places for your villagers to work, and it has a goal to work towards, aka gathering resources, doing research, or crafting items, then your villagers will automatically slot into it. Now you need to set what the villagers are doing in that production building. So in the case of like a forager's hut, you might want it to gather only flax and sage, and then you need to set the amount of the resources that they gather. When it comes to item production, you need to set which items, and of course, again, how much. And when it comes to the research table, you need to set research goals. So this is the stuff that they need to be able to do in production buildings. Otherwise, your villagers are smart enough to see, I can't do anything in this building, so I won't slot into it. Now, the way that you have control over which villager goes into which building is via a priority system. So if you set a high priority for a forager's hut and a low priority for the research table, then your villager will, as soon as the forager's hut is full, they will look for every other building where they can work until at the bottom of the list is your lowest priority. In this case, let's say the research table, but they will try and not be idle. They will always try and look for other buildings if their highest priority buildings aren't available to them. Now, the way that you're supposed to set these priorities is according to their skills, because your villagers, but also you as a character yourself, have skills. So in the case of the previous villager, they might be really good at foraging resources, but they might be really bad at research. So you set a high priority for the forager's hut, but you set a very low priority for the research table. So that way they work according to their skills, and if they have a high skill, they are just better at doing their job. Now, the main way to improve your skills and your villager skills is through books. I personally haven't figured out how to do this yet. There's probably a tooltip that I missed that I clicked away out of too quickly. But I think that you can also improve your skills by just doing stuff, although I can't confirm that. Now, I did mention a research table, and that's where you research along the tech tree, which is what we're going to discuss now, which is pretty, again, simple and straightforward. That's the main thing with Bellwright. It's simple and straightforward, but the tech tree you can pretty easily split up into two areas. You have the ones that make your village better, like this is where you find the production buildings, where you might find decorations, defensive things. But then there's also the side which is more war and combat oriented. So this is where you will find blacksmiths, you'll find weapons and armor and such. It's a pretty straightforward and standard tech tree for a medieval survival game like Bellwright. Now, the only critique that I have of the tech tree is that it's kind of really clustered together. It would probably be a lot easier to read if it's a bit more spread out and a bit more set up like a tree instead of a cluster, because now everything is so close together that it's like all the lines are going everywhere. Now, as you're building up your village and inevitably recruiting more villagers, you will slowly start to build your own little nation. So let's now talk about the nation/kingdom building aspect of Bellwright. Now, this is going to be the shortest part because I haven't touched the kingdom/nation making aspect, but as far as I understand it, this is based on assumptions and the few things that I spotted early on. But how it goes when it comes to making your own nation, it's you build your first village, you recruit villagers. All of these villagers can be turned into companions. Companions follow you, they will fight with you. So when you build up your village, you will get slowly more villagers as you go about recruiting them, which then can be turned into your own private army, which then can be used to liberate already existing villagers. And then you will also at the same time build more of your own villagers to get access to more resources, because the resources aren't clustered together, so one village is not going to have access to all of the resources, so you will need to spread around the map to have access to all of the resources. But again, this is all assumptions. I haven't touched this aspect of Bellwright, so I can't have like a clear and honest opinion on it. Now let's move outside of the gameplay and let's start talking about the game in general. Starting off with the UI, which is very clean and minimalistic, which I like. I like that there's only the necessary things on screen and there's not a whole lot of unessential stuff. So, for example, there's the minimap and there's the quest tracking. Though I do have something to say about the quest tracking, which, as for the state of the playtest, for me personally, was kind of broken. So the way that the quest tracking goes is, in the case of like a resource gathering task, like I needed to gather herbs. Let's say I needed to gather 2 pieces of flax. There would be the text of 0 out of 2 pieces of flax gathered. And then there would be a follow-up text that said, oh, I have such amount of flax in my inventory. Now, in the case of the quest tracking, it said I had 0 out of 2 pieces of flax gathered. But then in the follow-up text, it did say that I have 2 pieces of flax in my inventory. So it's just that first initial text that just didn't update for me. The rest of the quest tracking went along fine. I could still deliver the items and such. It's just that like that initial text just didn't update. Now then, let's move on to bugs. I don't want to spend too much time here because most of the bugs that I encountered were kind of visual bugs, like a bird floating in midair, still flapping their wings but just floating. And then I had NPCs, mostly female NPCs, because it is about dresses when it comes to clothing. But yeah, their legs would just clip through the dress. So it's mostly visual bugs. I haven't had any game-breaking bugs in the time that I played, although I played a short amount of time. So maybe some of you guys who played the playtest have had bigger bugs than I, but as far as I know from my experience, was mostly just visual bugs that I'm sure will be able to be patched out or be improved upon before early access. As a finale, I do have to talk about the dev team themselves, aka Donkey Cruise, because if you look in the comment section of Bellwright's videos, if you look at the community tab on Steam for Bellwright, you will inevitably see the comments asking what happened to Lost Oasis. Lost Oasis is the previous game that Donkey Cruise has worked on, and while this game is still in early access, it hasn't seen an update since 2022, so well over a year ago. Now, I have seen multiple potential reasons for why they abandoned their previous game. I've seen things about financial issues, I've seen stuff about publisher issues, but matter of fact is most likely, unless they are hiding something big, the developers of Bellwright did abandon their previous game. So this leads, of course, to the skepticism, and I would say the fair skepticism of the developers when it comes to Bellwright. Because pretty much their reputation with the way that they've handled Lost Oasis is pretty much in tatters. So I want you to take that into account when you look at Bellwright, because the main thing that you need to know about Bellwright is to look at it with skeptical optimism. Yes, the reputation of the developers right now is not good. Yes, the combat is like fighting in Jello, but the foundation of the game is good. It could be a game where you can sink hours into if the dev team prove themselves. This could be the game that turns their reputation around. But in the meantime, I would suggest a wait and see approach. Not jump at the game as soon as you see it. Just wait and see if it improves and if the dev team really shows what they can do. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If you want to know more about Bellwright, I only have 5 hours into the game, so I might not know all of the answers, but I might answer some of them in the comments. Anyways, have a wonderful day, guys. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button because it does help out a lot. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. Anyways, have a wonderful day, guys. Bye bye.